Before I deal in future video lessons with Shakespeare, who is the most representative author in the literary scene of English Renaissance, I believe it is important to take a look at the general situation that led to English Renaissance. To that effect, um, I would like to underline that 1453 is a key date in history for the future development of Renaissance around the world. At that time, Constantinople was conquered by the Turks, and the Greek community living in that area fled to Italy, where they took refuge, bringing with them the masterpieces of classical Greece, such as Homer's masterpiece and Plato's or Sophocles, just to mention a few. But they also took along important studies on physics and medicine as well. This historical event led first to humanism, or the new learning as it was also called, before becoming at its peak a Renaissance. Unlike arts in the Middle Ages, humanism highlights the importance of human reason through which interpret man and nature, while God, who was the greatest priority of man's development during the Middle Ages, is no longer as greatly important, and on the contrary, a new awareness developed during this time, allowing man to believe that it was possible for him to shape his own life and his own destiny without the need to fit in a divine design. The Renaissance developed in England somewhat later than the rest of Europe. It developed, in fact, only in the 16th century, and for several reasons. One of the first and most important ones is that, unlike Italy, England could not count on the lavish patronage of the aristocrats to encourage and foster the new arts. Secondly, when Henry VII came to the throne, he was pressed with more practical issues rather than having the opportunity to dedicate much time and energy to the development of culture. And in the third place, when Henry VIII came to the throne, despite the fact that he was considered a scholar himself and the embodiment of the Renaissance prince, after the Reformation and the conflict with the Catholic Church, this choice to dissolve monasteries proved disastrous for knowledge, because all the art and literary treasures that were preserved in the monasteries went lost forever. Along with these reasons, there are also more intellectual ones. For one, there is English struggle to be free of foreign influence, especially of Italian influence, since for the English, Italy was closely associated to the Vatican and the Catholic Church. And since uh, they were challenged with the establishment of a new religion, that being the Protestant religion, it was imperative for them to break away from Italy's Renaissance, which was dominant throughout all of Europe. Furthermore, English cultural background was deeply permeated by the Protestant ideas, therefore emphasizing more an individualism and self-acknowledgement um, that led their Renaissance towards an idea of personal responsibility, sacrificing in the process um, the joyful brilliance and self-assertion and enjoyment that instead characterized its Italian counterpart, which was instead rooted in pagan serenity. But perhaps just as important was the English efforts to develop a language of their own that could stand with equal dignity next to other European languages. So, despite the fact that they too recognized and appreciated Latin as an important language for universal culture, as a matter of fact, it was taught in all grammar schools and in the two most important universities, that of Cambridge and that of Oxford. Their main goal was to improve English vocabulary and syntax. Um, as already outlined, the general outlook also comprises a more detailed study or an analysis of the three major literary genres: prose, poetry, and drama. We will begin with prose. Um, as already said, Protestant culture and the English importance to improve their language deeply characterized English Renaissance, making it quite unique in the European context. Therefore, as far as the themes are concerned, in prose, the ones that are mostly prevalent are uh, strongly influenced, first of all, by the Protestant aversion to entertainment. And this obviously led the writers of the time to favor instead a more didactic aim in their writings. It is for this reason that the majority of the writings of this time described everyday life, were meant to be more realistic than other writings that were spreading in Europe at this time. So they provided reports of journeys to far off lands, or wrote sermons and even guides for business and the development of manners. Accordingly, then, the characters portrayed were explorers, teachers, craftsmen, and merchants. Furthermore, the struggle for a richer language was accomplished by experimenting extensively with it, inventing new words, adapting old ones, and by teaching rhetoric in schools. This challenge gave way to a flourishing of elaborate alliterations, long, complicated sentences, and witty plays on words. A relevant author of prose writing of English Renaissance is undoubtedly Thomas More, who was also a close friend and confidante of Henry VIII. Although their relationship went sour during during the Reformation, because Thomas More was adamantly against any break with the Catholic Church. In any case, in this context, we will analyze Thomas More as essentially the author of Utopia, which proved to be politically ahead of his time, and is considered a legacy to future to future socialist ideas. From the literary point of view, instead, he anticipated works as those of Swift, Orwell, and Huxley. The first edition of Utopia was written in Latin and published in 1516, whereas the second edition, which came out in 1551, was translated in English. It's in the form of a dialogue between the author and an imaginary character, a man who was knowledgeable about the things of the world, and the work is divided in two books. In the first book, the traveler represents England as it was in the 16th century, therefore devastated by political and aristocratic corruption and greed. Moreover, it describes how this corruption and this greed led to extensive unemployment and poverty among the population because the landowners of the time took to a new business, that of sheep breeding, that was much more profitable than land farming because it employed much less manual labor, thus laying off many peasants, condemning them to complete destitution. The second book, instead, which the traveler speaks of, tells more of the land of utopia, describing its stark contrast with the previous one. As a matter of fact, um, in utopia, the highlight is equality among all its inhabitants, free of competition, who could enjoy a moderate working day, and especially an enlightened place where education is guaranteed to all, including women. The conclusions draw special attention to what would have been defined later on as incredibly liberal reforms. In the second video following this, we will deal with poetry and drama.